Let me start by painting you a picture. March 15th, 2019, Boston, Massachusetts. Marcus Chen is having the worst day of his life. He's just been laid off from his job as a software engineer, his girlfriend of 3 years has left him, and he's drowning in student loan debt. At 34 years old, he feels like his life is falling apart. That same day, 3,000 miles away in Portland, Oregon, Martin Chen, a man who looks exactly like Marcus, down to the small scar above his left eyebrow, is celebrating the biggest promotion of his career. He's also 34, also works in tech, and also has that same nervous habit of tapping his fingers when he's thinking. But here's the thing that will send chills down your spine. Neither man knows the other exists. Marcus and Martin were both adopted as infants. Both were told they were only children. Both grew up believing their birth parents had died in a car accident. Both even chose the same college major, drove the same model car, and had the same recurring nightmare about being chased through a dark forest. But fate, as they say, has a twisted sense of humor. It was Marcus's co-worker Jenny who first noticed something strange. She was scrolling through LinkedIn, looking for job opportunities for Marcus, when she stumbled across a profile that made her blood run cold. "Marcus," she called out, her voice shaking. "You need to see this." She showed him the screen, and Marcus felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Staring back at him was his own face, but it wasn't his profile. The name read Martin Chen, Portland, Oregon. "This is some kind of glitch," Marcus whispered, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The man in the photo had the same crooked smile, the same deep-set brown eyes, even the same way of slightly tilting his head to the left. Jenny screenshotted the profile and sent it to Marcus. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stared at the photo for hours, zooming in on every detail, looking for differences that weren't there. Meanwhile, in Portland, Martin's sister-in-law was having her own moment of shock. She'd been browsing Facebook when she saw a friend's photo from a tech conference in Boston. In the background of the photo was a man who looked exactly like her brother-in-law. "Sarah," she called to Martin's wife, "come look at this. Is this Martin?" Sarah nearly dropped her coffee cup. That's impossible. Martin's been in Portland all week." For 3 sleepless nights, Marcus debated whether to reach out to this stranger who wore his face. Finally, at 2:47 a.m., he sent a simple message through LinkedIn. "Hi, Martin. This might sound crazy, but I think we need to talk. My name is Marcus Chen, and I believe we might be related." In Portland, Martin was having his morning coffee when the notification popped up. He opened the message and felt his world tilt on its axis. With trembling fingers, he clicked on Marcus's profile. It was like looking into a mirror. Martin's response came within minutes. "Are you adopted too?" What followed was a frantic exchange of information that lasted until sunrise. They compared photos, birth dates, adoption records. Everything matched. Both had been born on September 3rd, 1985, at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago. Both had been adopted through the same agency, Loving Arms Adoption Services. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. When they called Loving Arms Adoption Services, the receptionist's voice went cold the moment they mentioned their names. "I'm sorry, but those records have been sealed by court order. I cannot provide any information." "Court order?" Marcus pressed. "What kind of court order?" The line went dead. They tried calling back multiple times, but their calls went straight to voicemail. It was as if the agency was actively avoiding them. Martin, being the more persistent of the two, decided to drive to the agency's offices in Chicago. What he found there chilled him to the bone. The building was abandoned, windows boarded up, a for-lease sign swaying in the wind. The security guard from the building next door told him that Loving Arms had closed down suddenly 3 years ago in the middle of the night. Strangest thing, the guard said, shaking his head. One day they were there, next day all their files were gone. Police came by asking questions too, but nobody would talk. Despite the mysterious circumstances surrounding their adoption, Marcus and Martin decided they needed to meet face to face. They arranged to meet halfway in Denver, Colorado. Marcus's hands were shaking as he walked through Denver International Airport. He'd seen Martin's face in photos, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of standing in front of his genetic mirror. They'd agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near the airport. Marcus arrived first, ordering a black coffee with 2 sugars, his usual. When Martin walked through the door, every person in the cafe turned to stare. It was like watching one person walk up to their reflection. "Marcus!" Martin's voice was barely a whisper. "Martin!" They stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at each other. Finally, Martin laughed, a laugh that was identical to Marcus's own. "This is insane," Martin said, sitting down across from his twin. "Completely insane," Marcus agreed. What happened next was even more unsettling. As they talked, they discovered coincidence after coincidence that defied all logic. Both were allergic to shellfish and had discovered it the exact same way. Both played piano and had learned the same piece first, Chopin's Minute Waltz. Both had a fear of deep water stemming from a near-drowning experience as children. Both had the same recurring dream about a woman in a blue dress calling their names. But the most disturbing coincidence was their adoptive parents' deaths. Marcus's parents had died in a car accident when he was 16. Martin's parents had died in a car accident when he was 16. Different states, same type of accident, same year. "That's not a coincidence," Martin said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That's impossible." As they compared notes, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. Both had been raised by families with no other children. Both families had been wealthy but secretive. Both sets of adoptive parents had forbidden them from searching for their birth families, and both sets of parents had received regular payments from an unknown source, payments that had continued until their deaths. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like your parents." Both brothers stared at the phone in horror. "We need to get out of here," Martin whispered. Back in their respective cities, Marcus and Martin began their own investigation. What they uncovered over the next several weeks was more disturbing than anything they could have imagined. Martin, using his connections in the tech industry, managed to hack into some old databases. What he found made his blood run cold. Loving Arms. Adoption Services wasn't just an adoption agency. It was a front for something much darker. The agency had specialized in separating twins and placing them with families across the country. But these weren't ordinary adoptions. The families were carefully selected and the children were being monitored throughout their lives. Marcus, meanwhile, had been digging through his adoptive parents' old financial records. Hidden in a safety deposit box he'd never known existed, he found contracts, payments records, and most disturbing of all, progress reports about him. The documents detailed every aspect of his childhood, his academic performance, his social interactions, his emotional development, even his medical records. Someone had been watching him his entire life. The reports were signed by someone with the initials Dr. H.W. When Martin found similar documents among his adoptive parents' belongings, they realized the scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just about them. There were other twins, other families, other lives destroyed by this conspiracy. But every time they got close to answers, obstacles appeared. The hospital where they were born claimed their birth records had been destroyed. In a fire, the lawyer who had handled their adoptions had died mysteriously in 1995. Even the social worker who had placed them was found dead in her apartment 3 years ago, ruled a suicide despite having no history of depression. Then Marcus received a phone call that changed everything. "Is this Marcus Chen?" The voice was elderly, shaky, frightened. "Yes, who is this? My name is Dr. Helen Walsh. I need to meet with you and your brother. There are things you need to know about your past, about what was done to you. But we have to be careful. They're still watching. Dr. Helen Walsh, Dr. H.W., the person who had signed all those reports." "Why should we trust you?" Marcus asked. "Because," the voice whispered, "I'm your real mother. And I've been trying to find you for 34 years. Dr. Helen Walsh looked nothing like what the brothers had imagined. She was in her early 70s, with silver hair and eyes that held decades of guilt and pain. They met at a small diner outside of Chicago, far from prying eyes. "I need you to understand," she began, her hands shaking as she held her coffee cup. "Everything I did to protect you." She told them a story that sounded like something out of a nightmare. In the 1980s, she had been a young psychiatrist working for a government-funded research program called Project Mirror. The project was studying the nature versus nurture debate, using separated twins. The government wanted to know if behavior, intelligence, and psychological traits were determined by genetics or environment. "You weren't the only ones," she whispered. "There were dozens of twin pairs. We would separate you at birth, place you with different families, and monitor your development for decades." Marcus felt sick. "We were lab rats. The families didn't know," Dr. Walsh continued. "They thought they were just adopting children, but we were paying them, monitoring them, making sure they raised you according to our protocols." Martin leaned forward. "What happened to the other twins?" Dr. Walsh's eyes filled with tears. "Some of them found each other just like you did, and when they started asking questions..." She didn't need to finish. The brothers already knew. "Why did you help create this program?" Marcus asked, anger building in his voice. "Because I was young and stupid, and I believed we were doing important research. I didn't realize until it was too late that we were destroying lives, breaking apart families, playing God with people's destinies." She explained how she had eventually tried to expose the program in the early 1990s, but her colleagues had discredited her, destroyed her career, and threatened her life. She'd been forced into hiding, constantly looking over her shoulder. "I've been trying to find all of you, to warn you, to make amends. But every time I get close, they find out. People die, records disappear, and I have to start over." Suddenly, Dr. Walsh's face went white with terror. "They found us," she whispered. Through the diner window, they could see black SUVs pulling into the parking lot. "There's a back exit," Dr. Walsh said urgently. "Take this." She handed them a flash drive. "Everything is on here. All the records, all the evidence. You have to expose this before they silence you too." "What about you?" Martin asked. Dr. Walsh smiled sadly. "I'm an old woman. I've been running for 30 years. It's time for me to stop." The brothers wanted to argue, but she pushed them toward the back exit. "Go, and whatever you do, don't trust anyone. They have people everywhere." As they escaped through the back of the diner, they heard shouting from the front. They never saw Dr. Helen Walsh again. What followed was 3 weeks of pure terror. Marcus and Martin went off the grid, using cash only, staying in cheap motels, constantly looking over their shoulders. The flash drive Dr. Walsh had given them contained evidence that would bring down powerful people, government officials, researchers, adoption agencies, all part of a conspiracy that had destroyed countless lives. But they also discovered something that chilled them to their cause. They weren't just subjects in the experiment. They were the experiment's greatest success. According to the files, Project Mirror had been designed to create the perfect intelligence operatives. By separating twins and placing them in controlled environments, they could study which combination of genetics and environment produced subjects with specific skills and psychological profiles. Marcus and Martin had been identified as having exceptional potential. Their adoptive families had been chosen specifically to develop their intelligence, their technical skills, their ability to work under pressure. Even their adoptive parents' deaths had been planned, designed to create subjects who were emotionally detached, self-reliant, and loyal only to themselves. We're not just brothers, Martin realized. We're weapons they've been designing our entire lives. The most terrifying part was the final phase of the program. According to the documents, once subjects reached adulthood and had been fully conditioned, they would be recruited for special operations. The mysterious job offers both brothers had been receiving recently weren't coincidences. They were activation attempts. Their phones wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, messages from people claiming to be old friends but using details that were slightly wrong. The net was closing in. On their 18th day in hiding, they made a decision that would determine the rest of their lives. Marcus and Martin knew they had one chance to expose the truth before they were silenced forever. Using Martin's hacking skills and Marcus's connections in the tech industry, they began uploading the evidence to every major news outlet, government watchdog organization, and social media platform they could access. But as they worked, they made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in the deepest files on Dr. Walsh's flash drive was a video recording, a recording of a conversation between Dr. Walsh and someone they never expected to see. The video showed Dr. Walsh sitting across from a man in an expensive suit. The timestamp showed it was recorded just 3 days before they met her at the diner. The subjects have made contact, Dr. Walsh was saying. Marcus and Martin, they found each other just as we predicted. The man in the suit smiled. Perfect. And they trust you? Completely. They believe I'm their mother, that I'm trying to help them. Marcus and Martin stared at the screen in horror as the truth became clear. Phase 3 can begin, the man continued. When they think they're exposing the conspiracy, they'll actually be eliminating the witnesses, the other twin pairs, the surviving researchers, anyone who knows the truth. They'll do our cleanup work for us, never realizing they're still part of the program. Dr. Walsh, the woman they'd thought was trying to save them, smiled coldly. 34 years of conditioning. They'll never suspect that everything they're doing is exactly what we want them to do. The video ended with the man handing Dr. Walsh a file. On the cover, they could see their own photos and the words, Operation Mirror, Phase 3, Elimination Protocol. They sat in stunned silence, the weight of betrayal crushing down on them. Everything they thought they knew was a lie. Their escape, their investigation, even their decision to expose the truth, it had all been orchestrated. But then Martin started laughing, not a happy laugh, a broken, desperate laugh. Don't you see? He said to Marcus. Even this moment, right. Now, discovering this video, this is probably part of their plan too. They wanted us to find it. They wanted us to know. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Why? Because, Martin whispered, the experiment isn't over. It's never going to be over. We're never going to be free. They had a choice to make. and they knew it might be the only real choice they'd ever been allowed to make in their entire lives. They could continue with the plan, expose the evidence, and become the unwitting executioners in someone else's game. Or they could disappear, abandon their identities, and spend the rest of their lives running. But there was a third option, one that neither of them wanted to say out loud. "They need us alive," Marcus said quietly. "Whatever their endgame is, they need us functional, cooperative. That's why they've kept us alive this long." Martin nodded. "So what happens if we're not cooperative?" They both knew the answer. The program would eliminate them and move on to the next pair of subjects. But maybe, just maybe, they could take some of the conspiracy down with them over the next 6 hours. They made their decision. They would upload the evidence, but they would also upload something else, a complete confession, explaining exactly how they'd been manipulated, how the evidence had been fed to them, and warning others about the true nature of Project Mirror. It was a suicide mission, and they both knew it. But it was the first genuine choice they'd ever made. As they typed their confession, they talked about their lives, their regrets, the things they wished they'd done differently. For the first time in 34 years, they felt like real brothers instead of test subjects. "Do you think we would have been friends," Marcus asked, "if we'd grown up together normally?" Martin smiled. "We would have driven each other crazy. But yeah, I think we would have been best friends." They finished their work as the sun was rising. The evidence was uploaded to 17 different platforms, along with their confession and warning. Within hours, it would be impossible to suppress. Marcus's phone rang. Unknown number, but they both knew who it was. Marcus answered. "We know." "Mr. Chen," a calm voice said, "you've made a very serious mistake." "No," Marcus replied, "you made the mistake. You thought you could control us forever, but you forgot something." "What's that?" Marcus looked at his brother and smiled. "We're twins. We don't have to face this alone." What happened next shocked everyone, including the brothers themselves. Instead of being silenced, Marcus and Martin found themselves at the center of the biggest government conspiracy scandal in decades. The evidence they'd released, combined with their confession about being manipulated, created a media firestorm that couldn't be contained. Congressional hearings were launched. FBI investigations were opened, and most importantly, other victims began coming forward. It turned out there were 47 other twin pairs who had been separated as part of Project Mirror. Some had found each other over the years and had been silenced. Others had lived their entire lives, never knowing they had a twin. But now, with the truth finally exposed, they began to reunite. Marcus and Martin testified before Congress, telling their story to the world. They spoke about the psychological damage of being raised as test subjects, the trauma of discovering that their entire lives had been orchestrated by strangers, and the long road to recovery that lay ahead. But the most powerful moment came at the end of their testimony, when Marcus was asked what he wanted people to learn from their experience. "Family isn't something that can be engineered or controlled," he said, his voice steady and strong. "It's something that grows from love, from choice, from the decision to stand by someone no matter what. Martin and I may have been separated as babies, manipulated our entire lives and used as pawns in someone else's game. But in the end, we chose each other. And that choice, that's the only thing they could never take away from us." The investigation revealed that Project Mirror had been shut down in 1998, but elements of the program had continued in secret. Dr. Helen Walsh, whose real name was Dr. Catherine Myers, was arrested along with 23 other conspirators. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Many of the adoptive families sued the government for damages. A victim compensation fund was established, and new laws were passed to prevent similar programs from ever being implemented again. But for Marcus and Martin, the real victory was much simpler. 2 years after that first LinkedIn message, Marcus and Martin are still learning how to be brothers. It's not easy. They're both adults with established lives, careers, and relationships, but they're making it work. Marcus moved to Portland to be closer to Martin. They bought houses 3 blocks apart. They have dinner together twice a week and call each other every day. They're both in therapy, working through the trauma of their unusual upbringing. Martin got Marcus a job at his company, and they work well together. Their similar thought processes and problem-solving skills make them an effective team. They joke that 34 years of identical conditioning finally paid off in a positive way. They've also become advocates for other victims of the program. They run a support group for separated twins who are trying to reconnect. They've helped 12 other pairs reunite, and they're working with legislators to strengthen adoption oversight laws. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about their story is how they've chosen to remember their parents, both their adoptive parents and their birth parents. They learned that their real parents had been teenagers who genuinely couldn't care for twins. The adoption had been legitimate initially. It was only later that Project Mirror had taken over their case. Their adoptive parents, they realized, had likely been victims too, manipulated into participating in something they didn't understand. We could spend our lives being angry about what was taken from us, Martin says, but we'd rather focus on what we found. Marcus agrees. We lost 34 years, but we have the rest of our lives to be brothers. That's not nothing. That's everything. They still have the same recurring nightmare sometimes, the one about being chased through a dark forest. But now, in the dream, they find each other in the woods, and together they find their way home. Their story became the subject of a best-selling book, a documentary film, and congressional testimony that changed adoption laws forever. But for them, the real story isn't about government conspiracies or psychological experiments. It's about 2 people who refuse to let others define their relationship, who chose love over fear, and who proved that some bonds are stronger than any program designed to break them. In the end, Marcus and Martin Chen did something that their handlers never expected and never planned for. They became family on their own terms. If you found value in today's story, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support helps us research these cases, verify the facts, and present them with the care and respect they deserve. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us about your own family reunion story. We read every single one, and some of them become the inspiration for future episodes. Thank you for joining me today on Life Reunions. Remember, every family has a story, and every story deserves to be told. I'll see you in the next episode.